Of colonialism, the British government set to apologize and announce compensation over the torture and execution of Kenya's Mau Mau freedom fighters. We bring you comprehensive coverage of the latest from London and the expectations in Kenya and other African countries that suffered under British colonial rule. Hello and welcome to Africa Live, where we bring you African and global news from all perspectives. I'm Famida Miller. Now, also coming up in the next half hour. Raising a storm, South Africa's informal sector in protest over radical changes in licensing laws. And Tunisia's national football team braced themselves for tough Sierra Leone test in World Cup qualifier. We begin in Nairobi, where Kenya's independence freedom fighters are awaiting a probable formal apology from the British government for atrocities committed against them during the colonial period. British Foreign Secretary William Hague is expected to issue the apology, as well as announce compensation for the Mau Mau freedom fighters. Maria Galang has more details.
More than 5,000 Kenyans is said to have been grossly mistreated and tortured by the British colonial rulers during the Mau Mau revolt in the 1950s and 60s. After a bitter fight for land rights and other civil liberties, Kenya eventually got her independence in 1963. But 50 years later, the men and women who fought for the country's liberation still experience trauma, bitter memories and hardships. That's why they've been fighting for compensation from the British government.
I would like to be compensated, and also the children of those who fought in the rebellion to be compensated as well.
As Kenya marks 50 years of independence, an apology could finally be in the offing. British Foreign Secretary William Hague is expected to deliver the apology on Thursday in the House of Commons. Some reports indicate that a compensation package of $20 million could also be extended to the victims of the colonial atrocities. The UK had previously argued that all liability was transferred to the Kenyan government upon the granting of full independence, but it changed their stance in 2011 when the High Court ruled that three claimants, Jane Muthoni-Mara, Wambuga Wanyingi and Paula Mwakanzili, had arguable cases. In June 2012, a go-ahead was given by the British government on the quest for compensation. The Kenyan Human Rights Commission says that 90,000 Kenyans were executed, tortured or maimed, and 160,000 people were detained in appalling conditions. Maria Galang, CCTV.
Now, for more on the story, let's cross to Jane Keo, who's standing by in Nairobi. Jane, what is the possible reaction that's expected from these Mau Mau war veterans who've been waiting for this apology for decades?
Well, Famida, at the moment, the reaction is sort of mixed. A lot of apprehension, anxiety from the 100 or so Mau Mau veterans gathered here at the Hilton Hotel in Nairobi Central Business District. Now, we've spoken to them about the announcement that's about to be made in the next 30 or so minutes. They say they're not aware of what's about to be given or what's about to be said by the British government, but they do know that the government will, for the first time, acknowledge the atrocity committed against them and thousands of many others. And for that, they are very excited. They say they still don't know about the compensation package that's about to be given. Well, we don't know whether we're going to believe them, but that's what they are saying. Now, what's interesting, though, the excitement about the apology, even though, for me, that these are people who have lived with some of these scars for the last 50 or so years, and they're going to live with them for the next lifetime. Famida?
Now, Jane, looking at the apology that's expected, that alone, that an acknowledgement alone is very important for those veterans that are involved in the battle against the British government. But looking at the compensation package, what has the Human Rights Commission said? What do the veterans say about what's expected?
Well, like I said, the veterans are still they're still mum about the compensation package that's about to be given. But the human rights activists, they appear content with what's about to be given. That's the 20 million USD that's going to be divided about to the 5,000 or so claimants, and this will mean each will go home with about 3,800 USD. Now, this is higher in a country where the national per capita is about 821 US dollars. But we have to wait and see what kind of reaction they give when that announcement will be made in the next 30 or so minutes. Remember, this is an issue that has also divided the Mau Mau veterans. Not all of them are involved because it's an out-of-court settlement, but we have to wait and see when that announcement is made, what kind of reaction the veterans will give.
All right, Jane, thank you very much. We'll leave it there for the moment. There's Jane Kior coming to us live from Nairobi. Now, August 1951 gave birth to the Mau Mau, an African nationalist movement active in Kenya during the 1950s. Now, their main aim was to remove British rule and European settlers from the country. By 1956, British troops were hunting down the Mau Mau in the mountain forests. Most leaders were captured and executed. According to the Kenya Human Rights Commission, 90,000 Kenyans were executed, tortured or maimed, and 160,000 more were detained in squalid conditions. For years, the surviving freedom fighters have been fighting a long and complicated case for compensation. There was a significant turn of events in 2011 when the UK High Court ruled that the cases were still valid and the UK government was liable for the atrocities. 2012, a case for compensation was allowed to go forward by the British High Court. With me now in studio is Wanyiri Kihoro. Mr. Kihoro is an activist, politician rather, and an author of various books, including Politics and Parliamentarians in Kenya and Never Say Die, The Chronicles of a Political Prisoner and the Price of Freedom. Mr. Kihoro, welcome to Africa Live. Now, looking at the developments in terms of this apology and the compensation that will be given to Mau Mau fighters, what's your reaction to all of this, especially considering it's taken 60 years?
It has taken a long time, but it is never too late to do the right thing and to give justice to a people who have been oppressed for a long time historically. So the move by the British government is very welcome. And I would only hope that everybody who was affected will be compensated so that, again, we don't have a secondary issue where some will be saying they have been compensated and others have not been compensated.
So are there any plans in place to ensure that the compensation is equally distributed and that everybody will be happy at the end of this process?
I'm not sure about the list the British government has got or whatever amount of money they want to put on the table to be distributed to the Mau Mau. But I believe that they should start, especially with those who have died or are killed in the process of fighting for our freedom, and then go maybe also to those who are alive, because I would find it very difficult to accept that it is those people who are alive will be compensated, and then you forget those who died or are killed fighting for our freedom, and therefore it is very important to have a commission that will do this job in an equitable way, where compensation will be paid to those who died, those who are alive, and if they have died, to their families. That will be very important so that the compensation aspects will be taken the right way, and it will not be another opportunity for a few people to benefit and spoil the party for everybody.
Now, going back to the amount of time it's taken for the British to admit that, yes, we were responsible for A, B, C, D, and this is what we'll compensate you with, do you think there's any concern that this will set a precedent in terms of those who are colonized looking for compensation, and that's all over the world?
That is very good. I think British colonialism, the sun never set on the British colonialism for a period of nearly 200 years. India colonized about from the 17th century up to when they became independent in 1847. And for Africa, we speak about South Africa, Namibia, Zimbabwe. We also talk about other countries where oppression was not as much because there was no settler regime in these countries. But compensation for Kenyans who fought for our freedom in Mau Mau movement, it should mean necessarily that also those people who fought the Smith regime in Zimbabwe, those people who fought South Africans in Namibia, occupying Namibia, or those South Africans who fought for their liberation over a long, long time after Britain allowed South Africa to be colonized by a certain regime there, they should all be compensated. I think Kenyan case, it is very important in terms of setting the terms of the compensation and showing that it is possible. Many people thought, including myself, that it is not possible for Britain to come round to this position where they are talking about compensation.
But now Britain was not the only colonialist looking at the global history. Do you think that there's concern, or do you think there's any way in which colonialism and the way in which we look at it could change from here, especially considering that we are essentially going to have a superpower say, sorry?
I think it is very important for the United States. Still got some countries where people could be claiming compensation after periods of occupation. I think one of the biggest disputes between America and Cuba today is about American colonialism of Cuba at the end of the 19th century, and I think also for Africa. If you look at all the French-ruled countries, France agreed about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, to compensate people in Algeria because there was a movement for liberation in Algeria, which was very bloody. Just about the same time, like in Kenya, there are people in Yemen, or people in Vietnam, or people in Malaysia. Today, it was formerly Malaysia, where, and even in India and Pakistan, there are people who deserve compensation. And it's good Britain has come round to accepting that justice, even if delivered late, is still justice.
Mr. Kiora, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. We're speaking to Mr. Waniri Kiora, activist and politician, looking at the developments of that apology that will be given to Mau Mau freedom fighters in Kenya. It's time now for a short break, but when we come back, closing in on Boko Haram, Nigeria's military speaks out, ongoing offensive in the name of peace. And UNESCO awards French president for Mali intervention.
We follow the latest trends in global politics, economics, culture and sport, and how Africa fits into the global picture. You decide what's important.
We need a trade justice.
Africa's future will be determined by Africa.
For women's equal opportunity, for a better life.
We have to change something, and it's not the outsiders.
Talk Africa, a new voice for the world.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Now, still with our leading story this morning, we're looking at the apology that's expected by the British government to the Mau Mau freedom fighters in Kenya. We're now joined live by CCTV's Richard Bestick, who is in London. Richard, what are the details of this expected announcement that's to be given to the Mau Mau people in Kenya?
Well, it's to come from the Foreign Secretary William Hague in the House of Commons there behind me, the British Parliament, very shortly. It is a very significant moment for post-colonial Britain. The first official acknowledgement by the British authorities of the brutality used by some of its forces when attempting to put down what the British at the time called the Kenyan emergency. And now, of course, we know that since then the emergency was in fact a war of independence conducted by the Mau Mau between 52 and 60. The brutality was on both sides, but during the 8 years of the conflict, British colonial rulers involved thousands of civilians as well as Mau Mau fighters. They were rounded up and subjected to torture that included castration, rape and beatings. Now, as you say, the survivors will be able to claim financial compensation at least, and the knowledge that their ill treatment is recognised internationally with what we expect to be that apology from William Hague in the British Parliament. What one human rights lawyer here in the UK called an exercise in decency.
All right, Richard Bestick, they're coming to us live from London, just giving us some more information on that apologies expected during the course of the day. Now, let's move to Nigeria, where the military on Wednesday disclosed details of its offensive against the Islamist militant group Boko Haram. The military officials also displayed weapons allegedly seized from the group, including anti-aircraft guns, grenade launchers and machine guns. The disclosures were made to journalists during a military-guided tour of parts of northeastern Nigeria, where the government launched a sweeping offensive on May 15. The military's claims, however, could not be verified independently. The Nigerian armies come under intense local and international pressure over Boko Haram's 4-year insurgency.
They left their headquarters at the bush and withdraw out of this general area. When you get there, you see some of the items that were burnt there. By them, not by us, please. They don't want us to recover those items, so they have to destroy them before they left.
In other news, French President François Hollande's been awarded with a peace award from UNESCO for the French intervention in Mali. The award comes barely a year into his presidency and just months after launching his first war against Islamic extremists. The prize givers say Hollande deserved the prize because the Mali intervention is about long-term peace for a volatile region. Hollande was presented with the award at the UNESCO headquarters in Paris. Elsewhere, Turkish Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan arrived in Tunisia on Wednesday on the last leg of his North African trip that's been overshadowed by anti-government protests back home. Erdogan's visit is aimed at promoting Turkish businesses in the region. In Turkey, protesters have been taking to the streets for the last 6 days, angered by what they see as Erdogan's authoritarian rule. At least 2 people have been killed and more than 3,000 others have been injured in the unrest. And finally, the Electoral Court in Madagascar has confirmed the candidature of 3 controversial candidates for presidential polls slated to end a 4-year political deadlock on the island. The court rejected pleas by the Prime Minister and the armed forces to exclude current leader Andry Rajoelina, his top rival's wife and a former president from the race, as demanded by the international community. According to an internationally brokered roadmap aimed at steering the nation back to constitutional rule, these aspirants should not take part in planned elections. Earlier Wednesday, the envoy for the regional bloc mediating the standoff, the Southern African Development Community, said the international community would withdraw from the process